Let me welcome you and let me welcome everybody that is joining us on the Substack Live today. And just very briefly to say a word about your official resume. Then we will go to the unofficial resume, which I find way more interesting. But you are the author of 7 books, all of them, I think, bestsellers for the New York Times. You have 3 TED Talks with 5 million views. And your books have ranged from The Council of Dads to Happy Families to A Time to Gather, How Rituals Created the World and How It Can Save Us. And that was just released in May. And ritual is a favorite topic of mine. So we're going to talk primarily about rituals in that last book of yours. But for me, the unofficial resume and my first real meeting that stays with me is us in 2013 at a TED Salon giving our TED Talks. Mine was a first. Yours was?
My first also.
Also. And I didn't know what TED was very much. And I had never been to TED, and I came just like that without a piece of paper, nothing. And I saw you with a full text rehearsing. And I thought to myself, this is very different. Am I missing something? And you gave this beautiful talk on the agile system and how to apply it to family lives. And you gave the idea of how to run meetings in the family on a regular basis. And I just want to ask you that because you organized it around 3 very simple questions. And I did it for quite a while in my own family.
So yeah, I actually think I misspoke because while that was the first talk I gave at TED, I actually had given one about the Council of Dads earlier at a TED Med. Well, this is in fact how we met back in, it probably was 2011 or 2012. I had read Mating in Captivity and I was completely captivated by it, and it's been such a pleasure to see you out in the world talking about the lessons of that. And I think it will come up later when we talk about ritual and my new book, A Time to Gather. But basically the idea that I was working on in what became my book, The Secrets of Happy Families, is, you know, we were 100 years after Freud, and like people were incredibly frustrated about how to put their families together. And I felt like, you know, I've joked for years that I was like, therapists have had their say. Like, I want to go talk to people doing interesting things about how to bring groups together and bring those ideas into families. And I always say I broke my rule about not talking to therapists in talking to you. And I called you up and we had a meeting, actually. I think it was like I don't know, Pen Quotidien or something.
You came to my office, I think. Actually.
No, we met you. By then you weren't ready to do. I came to your office later, actually, for a different project I was doing, my book on Adam and Eve. We met around the corner from your home, and since then we've been in each other's homes, and I'm honored to be your friend as well as your admirer. But yes, the idea of having a family meeting, of having regular occurrences. We started when our identical twins, whom you know, were 5. They're 21 now. We just had one last weekend in advance of their coming home for the summer from college. And the 3 questions are, what worked well in our family this week? What didn't work well in our family this week? And what will we agree to work on in the week ahead? And what it is, it's sort of the whole idea of Agile is it's like the old top-down days when parents had the authority, or back in the day when men, you know, owned their wives and their children.
Yep.
Now everything is bottom up, and it's a different way of thinking about how to hold groups together.
I highly recommend it. I think it's such a simple structure, and like every good structure, when it is simple, it actually invites depth and surprise. You have no idea what people will actually be talking about. And these children, because they have this, they're at the table. Everybody's at the table in an equal fashion.
That's exactly right. And in fact, that's what it is. And when our kids were very young, we would have them participate in discussing what the consequences of the various things that were not going well. So you invite them in. And we know now that group life, and that prepares kids for the life that we live now, where companies aren't run top down, teams aren't run top down, even politics and the military aren't run top down anymore. It's a more collaborative environment, and that's and there we go. This is sort of one of the through lines of what I've been interested in for a long time.
Tell me, Father Days is approaching, and you did write The Council of Dad, and it was based on a very interesting, very personal premise. A, what was the premise? And 2, give us a sense of what it would be your advice actually for celebrating Father's Day, especially for people who may be fatherless or estranged from male caregivers in their life. I mean, this is a perfect moment to just kind of.
Yeah, you and I were at a dinner recently where we were talking about, the new kinds of families, and that's a big thing. Like the nuclear family still exists, but we now have, married people who live apart. We have divorced people who nest together. We have people with chosen families and single parents and the like. And the origin of that project was, as I mentioned, my wife and I went from empty nest to full nest 21 years ago when my wife when they gave birth to identical twin daughters. And 3 years later, almost to the day, I was diagnosed with a rare aggressive form of bone cancer in my left leg. I had an osteosarcoma. 800 people a year get one. 85% are under 21. I was one of 100 adults in America who got this disease, and it looked like, and my life was in grave danger. And I went through a whole long treatment, a year of chemotherapy. I was on crutches for 2 years. I had my left leg reconstructed, and I was worried that I was going to leave my children fatherless. And 3 days later, I awoke with this idea that I would ask a group of friends to be present in the lives of my children, and in fact, to be my voice in the event that I was not here to be my voice. And it came to me right away. Like, I would call this group the Council of Dads. As you know, I wrote a memoir about this. It was actually, as I said, my first TED Talk, later became a TV series on NBC, and it resonated with a lot of people. And I think in the context of your question, I think there's two ways to think about something like Father's Day. The first, which we'll in effect get to in a second, is to think about it as an occasion to create a ritual gathering, right? Where you pull
Yes,
everybody
because what
apart.
you did was a ritual. You elevated these people, you gave them meaning, and you gave them structure, and you gave them something symbolic. How to remember you and to channel you if one day you are not there. That was a ritual, right? That's how I define ritual.
Absolutely. It was definitely, I created a circle, I called it a council.
Yeah.
And it also gave me agency, which we often don't feel like when we're in times
Yep.
of transition or in that case, a life-threatening situation. But it also did something else, which I think answers the second question about for those who aren't close to their biological fathers. It created a new kind of figure in our lives, like not family, not friends, but this other kind of person. And I think that a lot of what I mean, it's been interesting. You've done this, of course, for decades, but you put ideas on the world and you don't know where they're going to go. And one of the things that happened with Council of Dads is I heard from single moms who didn't have a dad, maybe had a child through surrogate. I heard from gay moms who did not have a figure like, and what it identified is a kind of father figure that we have in our lives. And so even if somebody may not be close to their biological father, either by choice or by circumstance, odds are that that they have father figures in their lives. And I think Father's Day can be an occasion
I
to
can't agree
reconnect with
more.
those people, thank them, acknowledge them, maybe make some sort of ritual where you honor that. And basically a lot of these ritual ideas, a lot of it is, I think of it as, let's just say, values lived out loud. It is putting embodied actions to feelings that we have that we don't often put into embodiment, into action, into feeling.
And I would add to it, the reason it's called Father's Day is because there's a day that is set aside. And then we think, oh, but one should be the father all the time, or one should have this role all the time. But it is about demarcation, it is about delineation, it is about
Yeah.
elevating so that you actually, for a moment, pay more attention to something. Yes, you should pay attention to it always, but it is not a bad idea to have moments, designated moments, that ask us to pay attention. Father figures can be mentors, can be coaches, can be teachers, can be neighbors, can be the father of your best friend. It's the role that is more important than the biological affiliation.
I think that's beautifully said. Coaches, absolutely, for sure. The theater, the theater director for the theater kid, right? Whatever it might be. But I think this is an interesting pivot to go deeper into ritual. But so let's put a definition of ritual on the table because
Yep,
it
go ahead.
relates exactly to what you just said, which is a ritual is a shared, unnecessary act that makes us feel at home. Okay. So it's an act. It's a doing. We're not talking here. We're doing. It's
Mhm.
shared because it connects us, but it's the unnecessary part of it that's relevant to what you said about having a single day, right? So what do I mean by unnecessary? You don't need to get down on one knee to propose. You don't need to wear black to mourn. You don't need to circle the bride 7 times to get married. These are unnecessary things that become necessary because we invest them with collective meaning and they make us feel at home. So here's what you have with a Mother's Day, with a Father's Day, with a with America's birthday, whatever it might be. We are saying we're going to step out of the ordinary and do something a little bit extraordinary, make an effort. And we know from all of the data, I read 500 academic studies while working on A Time to Gather, this book on ritual. We know that the more you invest in something, the more you take out of it. So the fact that it takes resources, frankly, you don't even need a lot of money, but the time and the effort, and that's what happens on something like Father's Day. You put in the effort, and the effort becomes self rewarding.
So it's interesting because at first when you said unnecessary, I was like,
Yes, exactly. Right? It
no.
seems hostile.
And I said, no, but it's meaning making, right?
Yeah.
It's like if I look at the work I do around relationships, around dating, around sexuality, around erotic intimacy, I always say a routine is one thing, but
Yes.
a ritual is a routine that is invested with creativity and meaning. And I think the word that I have always associated with ritual is symbolism. Symbolism is an elevated meaning. It,
Yes.
it is not concrete. It is not directly attached to this thing. It is conceptual. And do you agree with that
I
addition?
absolutely agree with that. I mean, there's a quote in the introduction of my book, and I'm almost tempted to grab the book in front
No,
of
no,
me and
no,
read
because I
it.
have too many good questions.
Exactly. But and the point is that symbol is the greatest human invention, right? And that is part of what distinguishes us. And we know with ritual that we know it's the most elemental human.
How does it distinguish us, Bruce? How
It
does
distinguishes us because it is investing something invisible with meaning and identity and collectivity. The first thing that we did, 300, we have evidence now, Esther, and you know this, from 300,000 years ago. This is before we were anatomical humans, that the first thing we did was gather to bury our dead. We think today that sort of religion created ritual, right? And that a lot of our relationship with ritual is somewhat complicated because of the complex relationship we have with religion. That is not what happened. Ritual predated religion by hundreds of thousands of years. It predates civilization. It predates being anatomical human. It predates every single thing that we did, perhaps even communication. It was a way of communicating through action. And so it was, to put it in contemporary terms, the original human algorithm. And so today, when we are at a moment when the algorithms that we've invested meaning in are built and designed and purposely created to divide us, that's why this book is called A Time to Gather: How Ritual Created the World and How It Can Save Us, because it's the only thing strong enough to counter the algorithms of hate. And when I fell into this story, I just want to do a flag for the last part, which is makes us feel at home. As you know, the origin of this story, and because you read an early copy, you gave me a beautiful blurb, and I'm here to thank you and honor you publicly for being supportive of A Time to Gather. But you know, uh, we dropped our kids off at college 18 years after we went from empty nest to full nest, and we did it in reverse, and we went from full nest to empty nest. And I walked
there
through
was nothing to, there was no ritual.
Right, well, exactly, and I walked in, and I felt homesick in my own home, and I felt all my relationships were being frayed. So many of us are having this yearning to connection. The enemy's in our pockets, and I went looking for solutions, and that's where I found this incredible story that we are returning to ritual precisely, because, we all feel this, yearning to connect.
But there's two things happening at the same time, right? Birth rituals and coming of age rituals have
Yeah,
plummeted.
yeah,
And I do think, like you, that it has something to do with the weakening of religion. And so it opens up a possibility for people to go and create their own rituals, but without the structure,
yeah,
without the institutions to support it. And we're much better at creating rituals for weddings than for funerals. I mean, when we are not in crisis, we can be creative. We can invent new things.
Yeah.
We can talk about baby showers. We can talk about, all kinds of transitional rituals. But when we are in crisis, when we're in the midst of anguish, it's not really a good time to start to think, how do I want to mark this event? So there's fewer than half Americans are married, fewer
Yeah.
than, only 1 in 3 person in the US is at this point being buried. I mean, that doesn't mean that that's the only way to have a ritual of death, but there is. Do you really think that what we are creating is equal to what we have lost?
Well, first of all, that's the big existential question. And the short answer to that is we get to decide. We're going to decide. The story is yes. So I walk through my home. I feel homesick in my own home. I'm like, I'm going to look for solutions. And I stumble into what I think of as the most amazing story I've encountered in 40 years of writing books professionally,
Wow.
and what I think may be the great untold story in the world right now. And that is that ritual works. Okay. We've been doing it for 300,000 years. We have all this evidence. And
What
yet the
ritual did you
tradition,
do? What did you do?
well, that's what I'm going to say. So then the traditional rituals are in decline, as you just said, but all these new rituals are rising. So what did I do? I went on a round the world ritual road trip. I'm an empty nester. That's the blessing, right? And one thing you and I share is we're kind of borderless people and we encounter the world. And so I spent 3 years attending and joining in life rituals in 16 countries on 6 continents. And some of them were traditional rituals, as you say, like a group baptism at the Vatican that are being reinvented because now gay, offspring of gay parents and even transgender parents, the Vatican has allowed them to be blessed. Traditional bride price negotiation in South Africa, an adolescent tooth filing in Bali. But then I went to also all these new rituals, sauna and cold plunging in Copenhagen, forest bathing in Chile, sound bathing. And and a lot of these new rituals, as you say, some of them might sound silly, like, you know, gender reveals or promposals, but a lot of them have meaning for
I don't
things.
think there's this. They're. I don't think they're stupid at all, but they are more niche.
Yes, they're more niche.
They're
But
more
some of
niche.
them are things like cancerversaries, soberversaries, death of life doulas, but also death of company doulas. But a lot of them are things that organized institutions, and I wrote 5 books about the Bible. Like I like I'm a defender of religion, did not honor. So not just marriage, but divorce.
Very good point. Very good.
Not just birth, but stillbirth. Not just fertility, but infertility. My wife's favorite chapter, Linda, whom you know, is the Taylor Swift divorce party. It's a great story about a woman. Her parents are divorced, both of her grandparents. Her life goal, I'm not going to get divorced. But you can imagine what happens. She grows up, she gets divorced. Her husband takes half her belongings. She gives the other half away, and she walks in and she says, "You know what I need now? I need a registry. I have no sheets to sleep on. I have no towels to dry with. I have no toothbrush holders." And she starts this. She gets half the market of people divorced, asking their friends to join. And then what happens is she says, "I need a ritual." And so she creates the Taylor Swift divorce party, shake it off cupcakes. We are never, ever getting back together napkins. And it goes viral. And I ask her why. And I think this is what speaks to you and your work as a public, not just a private, counselor and therapist and advisor, but a public one. She says, "I'm a millennial. Like we grew up, we went on AOL chat rooms and on Facebook groups, and we started saying, my husband's doing this, and I feel like I'm being gaslit, or what about that?" And other women are saying, yeah, me too. And older women are saying, I felt that way, but I didn't have the confidence to leave. You find these communities where we need them. And it was, as a young millennial designer told me about a mastectomy ritual she did for a friend with 24 hours notice, just inviting people over. We're not going to lecture. We're not going to, we don't need to spend a lot of money. We're going to offer comfort. And she said, I'm listening to the deepest fear and the highest hope. And the purpose of the ritual is to turn the fear into hope. And what she said to me, Esther, is exactly what you just said. We want rituals when we want them. We don't need our religions or our parents to validate us. We just want the community, and we're creating it themselves, and we're giving ourselves permission to do so.
Do you think that it's I have nothing to add. It's just so beautiful. I actually do you think, I mean, that's a question. Why are we that drawn to create rituals now,
Yes.
especially in the time of technology, and how does that technology affect today's rituals?
Well, let's tell the story here. So, I was invited in earlier this year to run a ritual of renewal at TED in Vancouver in 2026. Okay, you came to this ritual, and along with uh, 49 other people who got into that room, and everybody said the same thing. Like, I was drawn to it, but I didn't really know what to expect. Okay, so I think, why are we drawn to it now? And we can talk a little bit what
Because
happened.
it
And you're
has an element of mystery. To
that's
me, a ritual is, you can set it up, but what happens is unpredictable.
Oh my God, you are so good. That's
Eh,
exactly right. You can plan it, and I talk to a lot of designers, and I have in my book, like, these are the 5 things you need to have a successful ritual, but ultimately, it's entirely improvised. And by the way, you're talking to someone who spent a year as a circus clown, as you know, wrote a book about the circus, and I always say what appeals about the circus, um, is you don't know what's going to happen, and that's part of it. Like, everything is so scripted and perfect now. There are death bots and God bots and love bots. If you're out there talking about this all the time, and they're perfect, except they're not imperfect, and we're all imperfect. So
It's
why are we?
part of why rituals have always been so connected to religion, because they helped us deal with the unknown.
Yeah.
Do you remember Geertz, the famous Clifford Geertz, who to me was one of the greatest anthropologists of religion? And he always used to say, it deals with the 3 main questions of religion, which every ritual, I think, has had something to do with as well, is how do you deal with the unintelligible, that which you will never be able to just explain, the mysteries.
And so what Geert, who wrote the most famous, the most, maybe one of the top 10 most famous articles in the history of social sciences on the cockfight in Bali, which talks about when he moved there and joined the rituals. And he tells the story, the first one he ever went to, the police came and broke it up because it was illegal. And everybody went fleeing, and he and his wife go fleeing, and they just run into someone's house, and she sets up a table with and says, we're here drinking tea. So when the police come in, they say, "Oh, the distinguished foreign visitor." And he said that act flipped the next day, everybody in the town in Bali where they were welcomed in. They calm us when we're in stress. They synchronize our heartbeats. Okay. They make our brain waves align. They make our families, our teams, our communities, our offices closer. So why are we doing it
They
now?
help us deal with suffering, not that we won't suffer, but bear the suffering, and they help us deal with evil.
Look, as you know, oh, for sure. Yeah, that's a great point. Boy, that would be an interesting thing. And why do they do that? Because they create our best possible selves,
Yeah.
right? In the world that you live in the human psychology realm, there's this well-known phrase about your best possible self. You can't become your best possible self until you identify your best possible self. What this is our best possible selves. And that, to me, is the answer to your question of why now. Okay, yeah. A, we've always yearned for this since before we were human. B, there's all the science of how it connects us. C, whatever your problem is, loneliness, this is the answer. Division, this is the answer. AI and the perfection and slop that it creates, ritual is the answer. But the real reason is because if you go to Instagram, we're doing this on Substack, but everybody still encounters the world, and you look up hashtag self-care on Instagram, okay? 21 million uses. If you look up hashtag group care, 18. We don't even have a language for tending and cultivating, nurturing what we know. The Grant study, 7 years at Harvard, you studied at Harvard, relationships are the most important thing. And we do not have a language for tending and building
No,
and
this is where Priya Parker's work comes in. I mean, she's doing everything. Her Substack is called Group Life in all.
and I blurbed that book, and it's a great example of, so this is what's going on. The rituals are the way we attach and reattach ourselves. If you look at 1980, the
Wait,
percentage.
wait, wait. Rituals are the way we attach. Slow down.
Okay, good.
You know this so well, but this is not obvious to all of us here who actually need to switch from self-care to group care,
Yeah,
and which I think is part of what we are both saying. And have always called it relational care, but it is plural. And what you are emphasizing is the fact that it is plural. There are plenty of rituals that are singular as well, that you do to yourself. You light the candle in the commemoration of a parent, or you do things alone. Not all rituals are collective, but they are part of a collective system of meaning.
Yes.
You
Yeah,
know,
and the Dalai Lama says, if you don't meditate for yourself, you meditate to connect you to the world. So even private rituals, as you say, lighting a candle, to honor somebody else and to think about that. What I'm saying is that groups are central to our identity, and rituals are the mechanism through which we tend the group. That's the essence of it. I looked at the number of rituals that someone had in 1800 versus today, it's down 80% in terms of the basic building blocks of a family. But the difference between 1800 and today, and even from when Arnold van Gennep, the German anthropologist, invented the phrase rites of passage in 1909, is that we have many more passages, right? I've been working on life rituals life transitions. My book Life is in the Transitions. I
yeah.
analyze hundreds of stories. I've done, 10,000 hours of stories. And what I learned is that we spend half of our lives in transition today.
But
That's the big
if
change.
they are so important, how come there's so few?
Because people believe you need to be trained to create them. I got an email yesterday from one of my closest friends. I love the stories. You're a great storyteller, story after story. I have a special needs sister. We're moving her out of her home. I want to create a ritual for this, but I have imposter syndrome. So that's why the great, Patrice Malidoma Somé, one of the great Western African spiritual leaders, said, everybody can do it. These are the three things that you need. Okay. Number one, you need to create a special place. Okay. You need to have an opening wow. We talked about this. It's boundaries, right? Outside we were that, inside we are this. That's the great insight that I've taken away from Mating in Captivity, right? You have to leave the ordinary and enter the non-ordinary.
Right.
Create a circle, right? Invite people in, light a candle, sing a song, pass the stick, eat a special food, create a special thing. And you have to say, okay, what is the tension we're experiencing now? What is the transition that we're in? Okay. And what are we here for? We're here to celebrate Father's Day, a
Right.
wedding, a baby naming. We're here to mourn the loss of a job, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a pet. Pet funerals are now a $3 billion business, for gosh sakes. That's the same feeling. You need a special thing. Number two, you need a peace plan. There's going to be, you and I are having a wedding. You want a big wedding. I want a small wedding. We're grieving. You want to do it under the covers with a cat. I want a big old Irish wake. You need a compromise. You need to give everybody their own element as part of this ritual. And then finally, you need a moment of hope. You end, as we did in the ritual that you participated in TED, had people take a pebble and write out their hope, put it upside down in the middle. Everyone took someone else's, read it out loud. We're now embodying our own hopes for the future and someone else. We've created a web of hope, our best possible selves, a beginning, a middle, and an end, opening wow, a peace plan, and a moment of hope. That's all you need. You don't need money, time, or anything else.
It's interesting. When you describe it like that, and it starts with creating a special place, a boundary, and I think about how when I wrote Mating, began to distinguish between sexuality and eroticism. And I read Octavio Paz, The Double Flame at the time, very important book for me, where he talks about sexuality, the instinct, the primary, the biological, but eroticism rooted in it's basically sexuality transformed by the human imagination, and it thrives on ritual. The ritual is what gives the meaning and the poetics to the sexuality. And it really is a framework that one can take to multiple different explorations and examinations. And with that, I am getting the gong in the middle of a sentence, and a good conversation leaves us with three dots at the end and a desire for more. And a thank you, because I think this is riveting, and everybody has this subject on their mind, whether we name it ritual, whether we name it meaning, purpose, intention. This
Presence.
presence, absolutely. We are very much in need of it, and we have for the first time a lot of opportunity to create it ourselves with our own imagination. Which, if we had continued, I would have said our traditional society less likely to have the same experience of creating new rituals because they have their own grounded rituals. They're admired. They're rooted
That
in.
is the opportunity of today. You just put your finger on it.
This is what I think, we can bemoan the loss, but we have something about this openness, the fact that it's a vacuum that allows us to step in and to fill it with grand plans. Voila.
Well,
On
first
that
of all,
note,
thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for what you all do to help us create moments of connection and meaning. And maybe the first question you asked is, can these new rituals survive? To me, we face a choice, right? It's virtual or ritual. It's URL or IRL. And if we choose ritual, it's the way home. We have the power. The thing that we're missing in the conversation today is as the digital saturation infests all of our lives, there is going to be the human reaction. And the human reaction is ritual gathering that will create the connection, and that will put a flag for what it means to be human today.
beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Esther.
everyone, and see you next time for our next Substack Live.